Welcome to True Echo, where every story echoes the power of truth, justice, and unforgettable courage. Today's story is one of silent strength, bold dignity, and a mother's thunderous stand against prejudice. When an innocent black girl was kicked out of her rightful first-class seat, no one expected what happened 5 minutes later. But when her powerful CEO mother arrived, everything changed. This is a story you don't want to miss. The air in first class was hushed, almost reverent, as the final passengers trickled in and settled into their plush leather seats aboard Mesa Airlines Flight 227. Maya Johnson, just 11 years old, sat quietly in seat 2A with her hands folded on her lap and her back perfectly straight like her mother taught her. She wasn't fidgeting. She wasn't playing music. She was simply staring out the window, her eyes reflecting the streaks of afternoon light that danced across the tarmac. But peace doesn't always last, especially when prejudice is involved. The voice sliced through the cabin like a razor. Get out of this seat immediately. You're making the other passengers uncomfortable. It belonged to Catherine Ward, the flight's lead attendant. She didn't shout, but her tone brooked no argument. Her posture was tight with authority, her navy uniform sharp and spotless, and the faintest sneer tugged at her lips as she stared down at the little girl in 2A. Maya turned, startled but not panicked. "I haven't done anything wrong," she said softly, her voice steady but puzzled. Her mother had gone over everything before the flight: boarding pass, behavior, how to handle emergencies. She was allowed to fly alone. More than allowed, she had been confirmed in first class through Mesa's VIP concierge service. But Catherine didn't want to hear any of that. "Sweetheart, this is first class," she said in a syrupy tone that barely masked the disdain beneath. "You must be in the wrong seat. Let me show you where you belong." "I'm in the right seat," Maya said calmly, reaching into her pocket and offering the boarding pass. "It's right here. C2A. You can check it." Catherine didn't check it. She didn't even glance at it. Instead, she turned to face the nearby passengers with an exaggerated sigh. "Unaccompanied minors aren't allowed in first class," she declared loudly, loud enough to make Maya feel smaller than ever. "You need to move to economy now." Gasps and murmurs fluttered through the cabin like restless birds. A few passengers exchanged glances. Some looked away. One middle-aged woman, Linda Rivera in seat 2C, leaned forward. "Excuse me," she said, "why are you forcing this girl to move? She hasn't done anything wrong." Catherine ignored her. Maya felt the heat rise in her cheeks, but she sat straighter. "My mother confirmed this seat weeks ago," she said. "She called the VIP line herself. It's all approved. You can check with your supervisor." The calm clarity in Maya's voice briefly unsettled Catherine, but only for a moment. "Do not argue with me, child," she snapped. "Pack your things and follow me to the back, or I will have someone escort you." Maya's heart thudded, but her posture didn't waver. She heard her mother's voice in her head: "We never bow before injustice, not even a little." She inhaled deeply. "I'm sorry," she said firmly, "but I will not leave this seat. It's mine." With a dramatic turn, Catherine stormed down the aisle. A moment later she returned, this time with the co-pilot, Jason Mitchell, whose cold expression showed that he had already taken sides. "Young lady," Jason said as though Maya were a disruptive adult, "this is not the time for debate. Move to your reassigned seat now or we'll call security." Maya didn't flinch. "You can verify my seat with VIP services. My name is Maya Johnson. My mother is Rebecca Johnson." Jason's eyes narrowed. "We don't take orders from children," he said. "This is your final warning." In the middle of that pressure cooker moment, Maya's phone buzzed lightly in her pocket. One glance at the screen calmed her soul. "Mom is on her way. Hold your ground." Maya exhaled slowly, clutching her backpack as tightly as she held onto her dignity. Her knees trembled beneath her, but she remained seated, rooted not by rebellion, but by principle. She wasn't just defending a seat. She was defending her right to exist where she belonged. The co-pilot loomed closer, his authoritative voice dropping an octave, clearly hoping to intimidate her. "This is your last chance." Maya's voice, though barely above a whisper, carried through the silence of the cabin like a thunderclap. "I'll go, but not because I'm wrong. My mother taught me to show respect, even when it's not returned." The line cut through the air like a blade, and for a fleeting moment Jason's mask cracked. He blinked, stunned. But Catherine, standing behind him, wore a smirk like a badge of honor. With a single nod, she motioned Maya toward the back of the plane. Every step Maya took down the aisle felt like walking through a gauntlet. The stares of passengers pricked her skin, some filled with confusion, others with discomfort. But she kept her head high, shoulders back, the quiet grace of someone raised not to crumble but to rise. As she passed row 3, Linda Rivera caught her eye and gave a small nod, a silent gesture of support that wrapped Maya in warmth, if only briefly. She settled into the narrow seat beside the emergency exit. Cold, cramped, undeserved. Her heart thudded in her chest, but she didn't cry. Instead, she immediately called her mother. "Maya, are you okay?" Rebecca's voice was the anchor she needed. "I'm fine," Maya said quietly. "They didn't listen. I told them everything, but they made me move anyway." "You did the right thing," Rebecca said firmly. "I'm already at the gate. Stay calm. I'll be on that plane in minutes." Hearing her mother's voice brought back a memory. Just 1 year ago, Maya and Rebecca had flown first class together. That time, too, there had been doubt. A different flight attendant had questioned whether Rebecca and Maya belonged. Despite producing boarding passes, they had been met with suspicion and were forced to stand awkwardly in the aisle while multiple verifications took place. That sting hadn't faded. Rebecca had turned to her daughter then and whispered, "Never forget this moment. People will try to tell you who you are and where you belong, but never let them decide for you." That day planted a seed in Maya's heart. Today it had bloomed. As she sat silently, a new face appeared in the aisle. It was Tamika Jones, a Mesa Airlines gate agent, who had checked Maya in earlier that afternoon. Tamika's expression changed the second she spotted Maya sitting in the back row instead of 2A. Tamika's brow furrowed. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. Maya had been polite. Her paperwork had been flawless. VIP ticket. Confirmed seat. First class. Tamika had seen it with her own eyes. So why was this little girl sitting near the emergency exit like she'd done something wrong? Tamika's instincts kicked in. She pulled out her phone and quickly called Mesa Airlines VIP services. Her voice, though quiet, trembled with urgency. "This is Tamika Jones at Gate 32. We have a serious issue aboard Flight 227. Maya Johnson, VIP passenger, has been removed from her first-class seat by crew members despite having a valid ticket. I personally verified her booking." There was silence on the line for a moment, then sharp alarm. "Maya Johnson? The daughter of Rebecca Johnson?" the supervisor asked. "Yes," Tamika confirmed. Everything was in order. This wasn't a mistake. This was a deliberate act. "Stay where you are," the voice instructed. "Do not leave the aircraft. Senior management is being alerted. We'll handle this immediately." Tamika's pulse raced. She glanced toward the first-class cabin and saw Catherine and Jason whispering in the corner, visibly satisfied with themselves. A chill ran down her spine. Jason suddenly turned toward her. "Tamika," he said sharply. "Is there a problem?" Tamika squared her shoulders. "Yes," she replied without flinching. "Maya Johnson was authorized to sit in 2A. I confirmed it personally." Jason's jaw tightened. "That's not your concern." "It is," Tamika said. "Protecting passengers' rights is everyone's concern." Jason turned away, his mouth set in a firm line. He whispered something to Catherine, whose smile flickered ever so slightly. But both knew in that moment the tide was beginning to shift. 5 minutes later, the cabin door opened again. In walked Rebecca Johnson. Her heels clicked across the cabin floor with measured grace, each step echoing louder than the last. She wasn't dressed in a designer suit or flaunting wealth. She didn't need to. Authority radiated from her like heat from the sun. Her sharp eyes scanned the cabin once, locking onto her daughter near the back. Rebecca's jaw clenched, but she didn't break stride. Behind her were 2 Mesa Airlines executives, visibly distressed and keeping pace. Every passenger turned to watch. Conversations halted. Even the engine noise seemed to fade. Catherine froze. Jason turned white. Tamika stepped aside with quiet relief. Rebecca gave her a nod of appreciation, then focused her gaze on the 2 crew members standing stiff in the aisle. "Miss Ward." "Mr. Mitchell," she said calmly. "Explain what happened to my daughter." Jason opened his mouth, but no words came. Catherine stepped in, trying to control the narrative. "It was a misunderstanding, ma'am. We were enforcing standard policy for unaccompanied minors." Rebecca raised a hand and cut her off. "A misunderstanding?" Her voice was razor-sharp. "You forced my daughter out of her first-class seat, one that I confirmed with VIP services, and humiliated her in front of strangers. That is not policy. That is discrimination." Catherine's lips trembled. Jason looked to the executives behind Rebecca for backup, but none came. Tamika stepped forward. "I verified Maya's ticket myself. First class. C2A. Everything was correct. Rebecca nodded. Then I expect a public apology. Now. And in that moment the power dynamic flipped. The passengers leaned in. The crew froze. And Maya, still seated in the back, sat a little taller. Because Justice had just boarded the plane. The cabin of Flight 227 was silent, heavy with the kind of anticipation that freezes people in place. Every passenger's eyes were on the aisle. Some still sat stiffly, not sure whether to shrink from the moment or embrace it. Others leaned forward ever so slightly, aware they were witnessing something far more important than a seat dispute. It was the kind of confrontation that peels back layers of polite society to reveal its raw, uncomfortable truths. Rebecca stood still as a stone, her eyes locked on Catherine Ward, whose earlier confidence had crumbled into awkward stillness. Jason Mitchell looked as if he wished he could vanish into the cockpit. An apology, Rebecca said again, this time louder, her voice echoing to every corner of the cabin. Right here. Right now. In front of everyone. Jason shifted uncomfortably, opening his mouth to speak, only to be cut off by Rebecca's laser-focused stare. Don't explain. Don't deflect. Apologize. Catherine's throat bobbed. Her lips parted, then closed again. The woman who had barked orders and wielded her authority like a weapon now seemed fragile, exposed. I'm sorry, she finally stammered. Maya, I shouldn't have removed you from your seat. I didn't mean to cause harm. But the apology was thin, its tone hesitant. The passengers didn't miss the way her voice cracked, not with remorse but fear. Rebecca turned her gaze to Jason. And you? He cleared his throat, trying to reclaim some authority. Miss Johnson, I regret the way things unfolded. It was never my intention to disrespect your daughter. Rebecca's eyes narrowed. Intent is irrelevant. Impact is everything. Then she turned to Tamika. Thank you, she said, her voice softer. You stood up when it counted. Your actions will be remembered. Tamika gave a respectful nod, her eyes glistening. For a brief second, she looked down the aisle at Maya, who sat quietly watching her mother defend her with grace and strength. A flicker of awe flashed across Tamika's face. That little girl had sparked this reckoning. Rebecca took a long breath, then addressed the two Mesa Airlines executives standing near the cabin door. I'm making this very clear. This flight will not continue with either of these crew members on board. My daughter and every passenger here deserve to feel safe, respected, and protected. Mesa Airlines has a choice to make. The executives, pale and tense, nodded quickly. One of them whispered into a headset. The other began texting furiously. Whatever was happening behind the scenes, one thing was obvious. They were taking Rebecca Johnson very seriously. Replacement crew are on the way, the taller executive confirmed. Miss Ward and Mr. Mitchell, please gather your belongings. Catherine gasped. Jason looked stunned. You can't be serious, Catherine whispered, eyes wide with disbelief. You're removing us from the flight? Rebecca didn't speak. The passengers answered for her, through silence, through stares, through their collective refusal to intervene on Catherine's behalf. No one rushed to defend her. No one offered a second chance. Because everyone knew exactly what had happened. Jason swallowed hard, glanced at the passengers, then nodded once. He walked toward the cabin door in silence. Catherine followed moments later, her face pale, her steps stiff. Their exit was slow and agonizing. It felt like a walk of shame, a reckoning played out in real time. As they passed the rows of seats, no one looked away. Some passengers even leaned back to give them room, the way people do when something toxic passes by. When they disappeared through the cabin door, the silence was replaced with a subtle shift in energy. Relief. Resolution. But most of all, respect. Rebecca turned toward the back of the plane and walked with calm dignity to where Maya sat. Her eyes met her daughter's and a soft smile curled at her lips. It's time to go back to your seat, sweetheart, she said gently. Maya rose slowly. She didn't sprint or stumble. She walked with the composure of someone who had been through fire and come out shining. As she passed the rows, Linda Rivera gave her a warm smile and nodded. George Whitmore, an elderly gentleman who had said nothing during the confrontation, bowed his head in quiet respect. Other passengers watched with solemn admiration. In that moment, Maya was no longer just a young girl. She was a symbol of resolve. She reached seat 2A. Rebecca gently adjusted her seatbelt and sat beside her. You didn't just hold your ground, Rebecca whispered. You changed this flight. Maya smiled. That's when the applause began, not loud or forced but gentle and real. It started from the back where Tamika stood near the exit, then moved forward row by row. Passengers clapped not out of obligation, but in recognition of something rare: integrity in motion. Maya looked around, eyes wide, heart thudding. She wasn't used to being the center of attention. But this wasn't about attention. This was about acknowledgement. She looked out the window, eyes shining, and whispered under her breath, "We never bow before injustice." And for the first time all day she felt light again. The applause tapered off into a respectful hush, but the warmth it left behind lingered like morning sunlight through cabin windows. Maya sat in 2A once more, her chin high, her fingers gently resting on the armrest, no longer clutching it for strength. The cabin had shifted, not just in mood but in meaning. What once felt hostile and cold now felt watchful, thoughtful, and strangely unified. Rebecca sat beside her daughter, eyes still alert, scanning the space like a strategist surveying a battlefield she just won without ever raising her voice. And yet, for all the applause and acknowledgement, Maya couldn't stop her thoughts from drifting. Would this moment last? Would it actually matter? Or would the world simply move on, unchanged, unchallenged, unbothered? She turned to her mother. "Will people remember this?" Rebecca nodded slowly. "They will," she said. "Because we're not going to let them forget." Just then a flight attendant, part of the newly dispatched crew, approached with a warm smile. Her name tag read L. Reed, and her demeanor couldn't have been more different from Catherine's. She crouched down to Maya's level and spoke softly but clearly. "Miss Johnson," she said with sincerity, "we want to welcome you back to your rightful seat. And on behalf of Mesa Airlines, I want to personally say I'm so sorry for everything that happened to you. You deserved better. You deserve better." Maya blinked, overwhelmed by the difference. "Thank you," she whispered. The new attendant straightened, gave Rebecca a respectful nod, and moved on with her duties. As she walked away, Maya looked at her mother again. "Is that part of the change?" Rebecca smiled. "That's the beginning of it." Minutes passed. The aircraft began to taxi, the sky outside still painted in soft golds and purples of an approaching evening. Passengers had settled into a quieter mood, many reflecting on what had just happened. Then, just as the engines began to hum louder, a soft voice spoke from the row behind Maya. "Excuse me," the voice said. Rebecca turned, and there stood George Whitmore, the silver-haired gentleman who had silently observed everything. His eyes were glassy with emotion, his hands slightly trembling as he clutched a small notebook. "I wanted to say something, if that's all right." Rebecca nodded. He turned his gaze to Maya. "Young lady," he said, "I owe you an apology." Maya blinked, unsure what he meant. "I saw what was happening," George said, his voice thick with age and honesty. "I saw it from the beginning. But I didn't speak. I told myself it wasn't my place, that I should mind my own business. But the truth is I was wrong. You didn't just stand up for yourself. You reminded people like me that silence in the face of injustice is just another kind of permission." He paused and added, "And I've been silent too many times in my life." Maya's lips parted. She didn't know what to say. "Thank you," she finally whispered, the only word she could find that felt big enough to carry what she felt. George smiled softly, nodded, and returned to his seat. More silence. More weighty reflection. Then another moment. From the opposite aisle, Linda Rivera slowly approached Maya with a small note in hand. She leaned in and gently placed it in Maya's palm. Maya opened it carefully. Scrawled inside were the words, "Thank you for reminding adults how to be brave." Maya's breath caught. She looked up and Linda's kind eyes shimmered with emotion. "You're the bravest person here today," she said, voice cracking slightly. "I'll never forget what I saw. And I'll never be silent again." Rebecca placed her hand over Maya's, gently squeezing it. This wasn't just an apology tour. It was a transformation. The plane lifted off moments later. As it rose above the clouds, the sky turned from gold to deep blue. Yet inside the cabin something had already shifted, altitude or not. Passengers sat taller. They smiled a little more warmly. And they watched Maya with a quiet reverence usually reserved for far older people who had survived far greater storms. Because on this flight, everyone knew, the smallest voice had become the strongest one. And this was only the beginning. The soft hum of the aircraft cruising at altitude filled the cabin like a lullaby. But no one slept. Not really. Not after what they had witnessed. From her seat in 2A, Maya gazed out the window, her breath fogging the glass just slightly. The clouds looked like mountains of cotton beneath the wing. Yet all she could think about was how different this view felt, how this seat, once so heavy with tension and shame, now felt like a throne earned. Across the aisle, passengers who had once looked away now offered her subtle nods, quiet smiles, even warm glances that spoke volumes. It was as if a silent oath had passed between them. We saw what happened. We won't forget. Beside her, Rebecca reclined gently, her posture still regal even in rest. Her eyes were closed, but her hand never left Maya's, intertwined in a grip that said, "I've got you. Always." Then, unexpectedly, a quiet chime interrupted the peace. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We are cruising at 33,000 feet with smooth skies ahead. But before we continue, I'd like to say something a little different." There was a pause. A few heads turned. Maya sat upright. "We are aware that something occurred earlier today on this flight. Though I wasn't in the cabin to witness it firsthand, I have since learned about the incident involving young passenger Maya Johnson." The name rang through the speakers with quiet reverence. "I want to make it known, as the pilot of this aircraft and more importantly as a fellow human being, that I stand with Maya, and with every passenger who believes in fairness, dignity, and the courage to do what's right. Moments like these define who we are, not just as employees of an airline, but as people." A ripple of hushed admiration moved through the rows. The captain continued, "Thank you, Maya, for reminding all of us that standing up, even quietly, even alone, can change everything. This flight will always be remembered for what it taught us." "Thank you." The intercom clicked off. The cabin didn't erupt in applause this time. It didn't need to. The stillness that followed was louder than any clapping could be. Maya stared down at her lap. She wasn't used to this attention, not at school, not at home. She was just Maya. But now something had shifted inside her. She wasn't just the girl who was wronged. She was the girl who stayed calm, who stood her ground, who didn't bow, even when everything told her to. Rebecca opened her eyes and gave her daughter a look full of quiet pride. "You okay?" "I think so," Maya whispered. A few rows behind, a woman who hadn't spoken earlier, an older black woman wearing a deep plum headscarf, leaned forward just enough to be seen. "You make all of us proud, baby girl," she said softly. "You carried more weight today than many adults ever have." Maya blinked back sudden tears. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear that. From across the cabin, even a teenage boy with headphones and a hoodie, who hadn't so much as looked up for the entire flight, gave Maya a subtle thumbs up before quickly looking away, cheeks red. She smiled. Just slightly. But it was real. Then Rebecca pulled out her phone and handed it to Maya. "What's this?" Maya asked. Rebecca smiled. "A message I just received from the CEO of Mesa Airlines." Maya's eyes widened as she read. "Dear Ms. Johnson, we are heartbroken by what happened on Flight 227. I want you to know that immediate steps are being taken. Not only have we begun a formal review of policies, but we're developing a new initiative to address implicit bias and ensure all passengers, especially children, are treated with fairness and humanity. We're calling it the Maya Protocol. Your daughter's grace and courage have taught us more than any training manual ever could. Please extend our deepest apologies and our deepest gratitude. With respect, Kendra Salazar, CEO Mesa Airlines." Maya stared at the message. "They're naming it after me?" Rebecca nodded. "You're the reason they're changing. Not just because of what happened, but because of how you handled it." Maya's lips parted as the weight of it all settled in her chest. Not as a burden this time, but as a quiet honor. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything," Rebecca replied. "You already spoke when it mattered most." And as the aircraft soared through the clouds, Maya knew her voice, her presence, had echoed far beyond Seat 2A. The clouds outside the aircraft thinned, letting beams of golden light pour in through the windows. Maya rested her forehead gently against the pane, watching the world blur below. But her mind wasn't on the altitude. It was on the ripple effect. She turned slightly and looked down the aisle, not at the flight attendants or passengers, but at the sense of atmosphere. It felt lighter, more aware, like the entire plane had exhaled and started again. Rebecca sat beside her, fingers tapping her phone softly. After a few moments she looked up and smiled. "They just posted the statement," she said. "What statement?" Maya asked. Rebecca held out the screen. Mesa Airlines had released an official press release while the flight was still in the air. The headline read, "Mesa Airlines launches the Maya Protocol following incident of discrimination on Flight 227. Below it, the language was direct and striking. We recognize that silence in the face of injustice is complicity. What happened aboard Flight 227 is a wake-up call, not just for our company but for the entire airline industry. The Maya Protocol will ensure that all employees receive extensive training in equity, inclusion, and immediate intervention. The post had already begun trending. Maya looked up at her mother, unsure how to process the attention. Do you think people will really care? Or will it be just another story they scroll past? Rebecca placed a gentle hand on her daughter's back. They'll care because of how it started. You didn't yell. You didn't threaten. You just stood your ground with dignity. People remember grace under fire. Just then, the new flight attendant returned, this time with a small box in her hands, wrapped in gold foil with a handwritten card atop. This is from the captain, she said with a soft grin. He insisted. Maya opened it carefully. Inside was a small sterling silver pin shaped like a pair of wings, the kind only given to crew members or very special guests. The card read, "To Maya. For your courage, your composure, and your example. You reminded us what it means to lead with integrity. You'll always have wings in our sky." Maya touched the pin, her throat tight with emotion. She could barely speak. Rebecca smiled, brushing a stray hair behind Maya's ear. "First souvenir of the movement you started." Nearby, passengers began stirring again. The elderly black woman in the plum scarf, who had spoken earlier, rose slowly and approached. "I wanted to give you something too," she said, holding out a worn leather bookmark. "This belonged to my late husband. He carried it through marches and protests during the civil rights movement. When things got hard, he'd pull it out and read the words on it." Maya took it gently, hands trembling. Etched into the leather were the words, "Stand firm. Even if you stand alone." She stared at it for a long time, the power of those 6 words anchoring something deep inside her. "I want you to have it now," the woman said softly, "because you've already walked the kind of road that breaks most people. But you didn't bend." Maya swallowed a lump in her throat. "Thank you." The woman nodded. "No. Thank you, baby." From the seat behind her, George Whitmore slowly stood again, his voice even more humble than before. "I've spent decades on this earth, young lady. And today, I watched a child remind all of us how to be better grown-ups." Then he turned to the rest of the cabin. "If there's anyone else here who stayed silent today and regrets it, I hope you'll join me in doing something better. Speak up. Show up. Even if you're late. It still matters." Several heads nodded. Someone whispered, "Amen." Another clapped softly, starting a wave of gentle applause that flowed through the aisles once again, not in celebration but in solidarity. As the aircraft began its descent, Rebecca leaned in and whispered into Maya's ear. "The story doesn't end when we land. It's only just beginning." Maya nodded slowly, her fingers still curled around the bookmark. She finally understood what her mother had meant when she'd said, "We don't always have to shout to change the world. Sometimes, a whisper in the face of injustice is louder than a scream. And sometimes, the smallest voice on the plane becomes the one that guides them all." The captain's voice returned as the plane began its slow descent. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're making our final approach. On behalf of Mesa Airlines and our new crew, thank you for flying with us today. And to our special guest in Seat 2A, thank you for showing us what real leadership looks like." A few heads turned again toward Maya. But this time, she didn't shrink from the attention. She didn't tuck her chin or hide behind her mother. She met their eyes. Because she knew, this wasn't about attention. It was about example. As the wheels touched down and the brakes engaged, the aircraft eased to a stop on the runway. The hush of landing was different now, not tense but reverent. Like everyone was waiting for something sacred to finish unfolding. The seatbelt sign turned off with a chime. Passengers slowly stood, but no one rushed for the aisle. Instead, one by one they paused as they passed Maya. Some gave her nods. Some gave a smile. One man, middle-aged, sharply dressed, paused and quietly said, "You reminded me of my daughter." "Thank you." George Whitmore, ever dignified, waited until he reached Maya's row. He placed a hand over his heart and said, "You didn't just reclaim your seat today, Maya. You reclaimed something for all of us." Maya smiled and replied, "We all have a seat. Some people just forget that." Rebecca stood beside her, watching with quiet pride as her daughter engaged with people not as a child, but as a change-maker. She didn't need to say anything. Maya had become her own voice. As the crowd thinned, Maya reached into her backpack and gently slid Catherine Ward's handwritten apology letter into the side pocket, right next to the leather bookmark she'd been gifted. Those items weren't trophies. They were reminders. Of pain. Of progress. Of power. By the time the cabin had emptied, a Mesa Airlines executive waited just outside the aircraft door to personally escort Maya and Rebecca to the terminal. As they stepped out, they were met with something they didn't expect. Applause. Real applause. Not from passengers, but from airport staff, security, flight crew, and others who had heard what happened. The sound echoed through the jet bridge. Maya froze. She turned to her mother, eyes wide. Rebecca leaned down. "Walk forward, sweetheart. You've earned it." Maya took a step. Then another. And the applause grew louder. In the terminal, a cluster of journalists had gathered. Someone had leaked the story. Flashbulbs popped, questions were shouted, but Maya didn't speak. She simply took her mother's hand and walked with calm grace, a living symbol of what quiet courage could look like. Within hours, video footage had gone viral. The hashtags exploded across platforms. Hashtag Mesa227. Hashtag the Maya Protocol. Hashtag Stand with Maya. News anchors recounted every detail. Commentators debated the state of discrimination in travel. Parents posted stories of their own children facing injustice. And within days, something remarkable happened. Airlines around the world began announcing new training protocols modeled after Mesa's initiative. The Maya Protocol had become more than a PR fix. It was a movement. Weeks later, Maya received a letter in the mail, not digital but handwritten, signed by executives at JetBlue, Delta, Southwest, and United. "You sparked something we forgot was possible," it read. "Thank you for holding us accountable." Still, Maya remained herself. She went back to school. She attended classes. She played piano on Tuesdays. She did homework like everyone else. But inside she changed. She'd seen what it looked like when one voice stood firm, and the world moved. And it wasn't long before others asked her to speak. At assemblies. At town halls. At community events. Her first speech was simple. "I didn't raise my voice. I didn't get angry. I just didn't move." And sometimes, that's more than enough. Rebecca stood at the back of the auditorium that day, watching her daughter with misty eyes. A teacher leaned over and whispered, "She's going to change the world." Rebecca nodded. She already has. At True Echo, we believe in stories that resonate beyond the screen. Today's story isn't just about a girl being wronged, it's about what happens when one child stands her ground, and an entire system has to reckon with it. Maya Johnson didn't raise her voice. She didn't lash out. She simply refused to accept injustice. And because of that, policy changed. Minds changed. Hearts changed. As Maya reminded us all, you don't have to shout to change the world. Sometimes standing tall is enough. If this story moved you, if you believe in courage, in fairness, and in the power of standing firm against discrimination, then we invite you to be part of this journey. Subscribe to True Echo for more stories that challenge injustice and uplift truth. Comment below, would you have had the strength to do what Maya did? And share this story. Because every time we spread a message like this, we make silence harder, and justice louder. Thank you for watching. And remember, never bow before injustice.